Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 21 team review. And oddly, of course, I did post a Game Week 22 early transfer plans last week, but as we know, that this game week really lasted an extremely long time, and we have some additional information now, but we're also expecting much more information in the future. We have some more cup games coming up, FA Cup games, EFL Cup games as well, and those will have impacts on potential blanks in the future, and also, for example, how we sort of plan out our immediate transfers. I don't really want to talk too much about the future, but I do want to talk about in general sort of my thoughts in terms of my team and general sort of transfer strategy for most players in the short term, particularly since it's very likely still headed towards the Game Week 22 deadline that we're actually still waiting on, more information. And I'm in a bit of a unique position with two free transfers where I can sort of talk about what I want to do and how I want to sort of keep my plans open. Speaking about my team, though, I actually ended up with 80 points. So actually just quickly looking at my live rank on Fantasy Football Hub here, I ended up with 80 points. And of course, that is sort of taking into account Trent, for example, not actually playing, and therefore Pedro Porro coming on for Trent, which hasn't updated on the live website. So that's why my live rank is actually 5999. And that's also been confirmed on Live FPL, another website that shows your live rank. But on the FPL website, of course, it still says that I've got 74 points. That's not true. If I scroll down, obviously, this is actually the team that I fielded this week. As you can see, it has some lovely players inside. Pedro Porro, of course, saving the day as well. Not as good as Estupiñán. Was a bit worried about Estupiñán because it seemed like he was on course to having quite a miraculous game. If he, let's say, had another goal contribution, it could have been quite worrisome. But ultimately, Estupiñán with 8 points, I think we can survive that. He was one of my transfer targets, and I'm a bit bummed, of course, that I didn't really go for him. Part of that is because I simply thought that, with Trent, we had a bit more of a guarantee that he was going to come back sooner. Whereas with, let's say, Salah and Son, I wanted to keep my options a bit open whilst also maybe, let's say, putting my eggs in a basket in terms of, let's say, getting another City player heading towards what is very likely double Game Week 25. As we talked about before the deadline, very high chance, of course, double Game Week 25 comes to fruition. We already saw for example, Brentford post about it, which was subsequently taken down, but that pretty much leads us to conclude that it's 99.9% in place. As far as my team, of course, Gabriel was very good. My differentials were Darwin and Richarlison. Also the Palmer captaincy as well, because there was a true 50-50 between Saka and Palmer. Their effective ownerships were both around 120 to 130%. I was actually looking at a content creators leaderboard, and I saw that, at the time on FPLGameweek.com, that out of the top 20 content creators, 19 had gone Saka, and I was the only one who went Palmer. So that was very fortunate for me. However, I'd also like to shout out Flapjack FPL. I think he went with the Darwin captaincy. I've also seen plenty of Jota captaincies miraculously, so congratulations to owners there. It's interesting because I think when we talk about Jota and reviewing, for example, the fixture there, it's tough for me to go there unless, let's say, with the news on Salah continues to get worse. The news with Salah, though, seems to have gotten worse, though, as it stands, right? Even though Egypt seem to be in a good position, for example, in AFCON, the news we actually got from his agent is that Salah actually has a worse injury than imagined, and that he does need that sort of time to rehab efficiently and well with Liverpool in the UK. So it does seem to be the case that Salah might actually not even be fit for FPL games, even, regardless of Egypt's position within AFCON up until Game Week 25. So that actually kind of calls into question whether Salah's a sell, and I think very likely he could be, which means that we need to be looking at other picks like maybe De Bruyne, maybe Jota, or even another midfielder, although I'm not that tempted, for example, in going for someone like Eze, because it also depends on, let's say, what are my plans for Haaland, right? I could very well go Salah to Eze and then, let's say, go Alvarez to Haaland, but it once again really just depends on Haaland's fitness. Haaland so far has been in training, but we don't exactly know what is going on with Haaland, so to speak. So I think if I was to, let's say, recap the games and just sort of think about the game week in retrospect, ultimately, I think the first half of the fixtures, nothing really surprised us other than, let's say, De Bruyne just playing amazing once again. With a limited time, I think no one could have really predicted De Bruyne's going to do that off the bench. He's capable of doing that off the bench. You can see Martinelli got a brace off the bench as well, but we can't guarantee those things in FPL. Usually when you're coming off the bench, it's not something that you look at, avidly with interest. So, shout out to the managers there, but I think that's one of those decisions that I definitely couldn't have predicted myself. I definitely wouldn't be investing into a player that I knew would be starting on the bench. But now, of course, a pick like De Bruyne seems to be very good. And part of that is because the landscape seems that, first of all, the news on Haaland still seems to be a bit suspicious. His injury, for example, we don't know exactly what's going on. There was a setback, and that's pretty much all we know so far. And he still isn't in full team training, even though it seems he's coming closer. And of course, the nice thing is we kind of have 9 to 10 days left to sort of see what happens, right? Whether he gets some minutes in the Tottenham game, or whether his first sort of foray back into competitive football will be that Burnley game, which leads me to believe, of course, that he'll be coming off the bench. And if he comes off the bench versus Burnley, do we actually invest into Haaland? I probably think that we don't, but it also depends once again on whether we own Mo Salah and continue to own him. As far as, let's say, Chelsea, one of the interesting things with Chelsea, I suppose, is that it's hard to sort of justify continuing to own Colwell because they actually seem like they have a very high chance of blanking on Gameweek 26 and 29. So I'd like to actually reduce the amount of Chelsea players on my team as much as possible to a minimum, really. And of course, now when I look at my team itself, I've got Cash, I've got Colwell. The two likeliest replacements really would be Estupiñán and Walker. And I probably still need to make a decision on whether I make both moves or one move. But I still think Walker, of course, versus Burnley is still the ideal fixture. It is going to be better than Brighton's fixture anyways. As far as, let's say, between Everton, Man United, and Spurs, ultimately it'll be interesting to see Maddison coming back. Spurs is a team that have been brilliant on the attack this season. Porro, for many reasons, has been sort of excelling because he has these sort of attacking attributes. But as I've been saying so far, there is going to be a big hindrance if, let's say, Maddison gets back into the team and takes set pieces away from Porro. So when you look at like the United game, for example, the amount of chances he was able to create, a lot of them were actually coming from corner positions. And those set pieces are a very important part of FPL. You can see that with, for example, how Estupiñán got bonus today from being a corner taker. And that's going to be an interesting sort of aspect that we need to sort of stay tuned to. I think it might be, an earlier exit for Pedro Porro potentially. It really depends on whether, let's say, the Spurs defense will also continue to improve on an underlying basis as well, and whether we actually have the confidence that Porro would actually be a better pick regardless. With United, obviously, still not much confidence in them. Aston Villa, I know a lot of people are sort of upset with Watkins. I feel like he's sort of the forward representation of a lot of people's upsetness with Saka as well, right? These are players who've been blanking. These are players who are worth a lot of money in FPL, worth a lot of our budget, and on paper are very good picks, but have been pretty dire. So ultimately, I think, whenever you look at picks like Watkins and Saka, they're just luxury sort of transfers out, right? Anytime you go out of them, first of all, you have to be very confident that the player you're transferring in is going to bring in a lot of short-term upside. And if he doesn't, then I think you run the risk of, for example, you've seen how good Watkins can be, even if he doesn't score, right? He's very capable of getting assists, 2 assists in certain matches at times. With Saka, of course, he's been blanking a lot, so a lot of people will sort of be looking at that as recent justification to sell him. But personally, I think also when I look at my team, I still have some issues to deal with, right? I've got Salah to deal with. I have 2 defenders that I really, really don't like having in my team. And ultimately, there are still tough fixtures coming and also blank game week fixtures coming. So when I think about, constructing my team for the future, it's better to actually plan around those blank game weeks instead, as opposed to, for example, taking a luxury player like Saka, who actually won't have a blank in game week 26 out of my team. I think that actually doesn't make too much sense. And I'm very happy to still own Saka, and I'll stand on that. Gabriel, of course, has been brilliant, but we also need to monitor his sort of injury situation. Doesn't seem like it's very serious based on Arteta, but I also think Arteta is not the manager who would actually really explicitly tell us if a player was injured. He'd probably tell us maybe by the next press conference, but we might not really get, very good information from that. As far as, let's say, let's say West Ham, interesting news, of course, is that Ghana were knocked out of AFCON. Very surprising result, of course, given the fact that it's very normal for teams to actually get out. But, well, actually, I don't think it's actually fully confirmed, but it's very likely at this stage in time. I think at this moment in time, they did actually just draw versus Mozambique, but based on the sort of rule where, based on points, for example, if they come out as third and other teams have done better than them in terms of points, still very likely that they actually get knocked out. Now, when we talk about a team like West Ham, though, yes, I think Kudus is going to be a huge improvement, because I think when you look at that West Ham team, ultimately, for example, Cornet is someone that they've been using to deputize within one of the wing positions, but Kudus coming back, and he's a little bit more flexible and a little bit more dynamic as a player. He could fit in multiple roles. So I think that could help, of course, the West Ham team. Were they pretty poor versus Sheffield United? I think absolutely they were. And if you look at, for example, Bowen's chances that game, they weren't brilliant. In fact, I think Ings was someone who, of course, benefited a bit more. But I think that's a very small sample size. We don't need to necessarily care about it. It's just very likely, though, that you could argue that Kudus is going to upgrade that West Ham attack. So given that they actually still have decent fixtures, West Ham is not a bad shout to invest into. And Kudus, of course, coming back into FPL will be an interesting option. Am I interested in going for Kudus? Not necessarily, because I think he's not at a price point where I think he's going to give me some excellent cost savings that I wouldn't have access to. I think Eze, for example, is another player that I still think was quite brilliant within the Arsenal game, but you can see, of course, how many levels apart that Crystal Palace team were with an Arsenal team who were able to completely dominate the game and control the game. So when I see it back, I think when you look at Crystal Palace versus Sheffield United, that's a really good opportunity for someone like Eze, who very frequently does move into really good positions, does attack the ball a lot, and takes a lot of shots that Sheffield United could be a very good game for him. And we saw the Sheffield United versus West Ham game was quite a bit of a back and forth, particularly within that second half. So I do think that's a good fixture, for example, to really jump on as a landing spot, right, in Gaming 22. With Tony, with Brentford, I think that was really surprising. When I sort of think about Tony, once again, just such a brilliant player. Plays deep at times, has a very visionary sort of game. Yes, of course, a lot of people are talking about the free kick, but in general, it just shows you how complete he is. I think completely dominated bonus as well. And part of that is because there's not many strikers sort of like him who are that ambidextrous, in both halves. He's a defender, first of all, but second of all, very, very good in terms of passing and actually sort of finding that outlet pass. Very close to actually getting 2 to 3 assists in that game itself. So positive signs for Tony. But I still think, ultimately, when you look at those fixtures for Brentford, they're much tougher, right? This was a good fixture on paper for Tony. And yes, of course, he did well. So he overachieved his expectations here. But part of me thinks that a lot of people might be just jumping onto a bandwagon where he does really have some really tough games. And we do have to be cognizant of that. So I think Tony is, once again, a luxury transfer. So when I think about something like Watkins to Tony, or let's say Saka to Richarlison, these for me still feel like luxury transfers, particularly when it's someone like Richarlison, has a bit of a precarious position within his own team, or from a minutes point of view, right? When we're thinking about, is it possible that, let's say when Son comes back, that he plays 90, 80 minutes a game as he's been playing recently? Probably unlikely to me that happens, but we'll see what happens too, particularly before Son comes back from the Asian Cup. As far as Liverpool, Jota, of course, delivered an amazing performance. And it does sort of make me think, of course, with, let's say, the Mo Salah injury and that sort of timeline of 28 to 31 days sort of being expected. I mean, what could I do with that, right? Could I go from Salah to Jota? Does my team have the abilities to sort of accommodate for such a luxury move? Maybe, for example, going from Jota back to Salah. That could be interesting, because I think when we see, let's say, Liverpool at their absolute best, it is often the case that Jota still plays less minutes, for example, less minutes than Darwin. And maybe actually the triple up that I would like to have is actually Darwin, Salah, and Jota, as opposed to, let's say, Salah, Jota plus Trent. Particularly since, as I said, with the forwards right now, I don't really need to be pushed to making a transfer. I think maybe, of course, Solanke is on the radar for Gameweek 23, but he still doesn't have a good game necessarily on Gameweek 22. So it's not like I necessarily need to pull the trigger on any sort of move to Solanke until Gameweek 23 as someone who doesn't own Solanke. If you own Solanke, I think you just hold him. And that's how I would look at that fixture too. It's not like Bournemouth were so bad that they deserve to lose 0-4. That was sort of the outcome of the second half, but I think Solanke had a lot of half chances in that game. And of course, when you're playing first better team or weaker teams than Liverpool, the simple reality, of course, is that Solanke is going to come good again. And I think I've got no worries about Solanke, which is why, of course, as I say, he's a transfer target from Gaming 23. In terms of Brighton versus Wolves, interesting, of course, that was a 0-0 game. Brighton, of course, getting a few clean sheets. For me, this is a bit of redemption to their season, right? Yes, we've said that they're a bad defense, but are they in any way as bad a defense as Spurs? Absolutely not. When we look at underlying stats, Brighton are still comfortably a pretty decent defensive side. And I think it makes sense, of course, that they can get a clean sheet here or there. This was a game actually where in the second half, I think they were sort of second best versus Wolves. Wolves were able to actually create some pretty consistent chances. And ultimately, it sort of does speak to, first of all, I think it is worth actually investing into someone like Estupiñán, particularly when a lot of the defenders that we have blank game weeks and things like that. Estupiñán is someone who is basically impervious to all of that. And the corners are a huge plus to a player who's just playing at left center back, right? Just playing at left center back, but still isn't very, very good attacking positions. And ultimately, when we look at a game like FPL, I think you just have to see how important set pieces can be. And you can see today it made the difference for 2 points in terms of bonus. So those are kind of things that I really like to look at. That's sort of my summary of the week in terms of all the fixtures, just thinking about sort of assets going forwards. Some of these thoughts will be, of course, deeply reflected on in terms of the cheat sheet. In terms of my own team, sort of just looking back and going towards sort of picking my team for the future and planning ahead. Ultimately, I would probably line my team up like this. Clearly, of course, Salah's not going to play. I do want to actually bench Palmer because I still think it's a very bad fixture. I think Liverpool are a very good defense. This is Liverpool at home as well. Mind you, Trent's going to come back, so I think that's good. I do need to monitor the Gabriel situation. I think that could force me, in two sort of directions, right? Either one, I have to sort of make a move away from Salah, or two, I just have to make maybe two defender transfers potentially, as another way to sort of alleviate this situation. It's a bit of a luxury, to be honest, to bench Palmer, someone who's that good. But I think at least one defender transfer is necessary just because City have such a good game. Do I really want to go into De Bruyne? That's the big question, right? Either I go De Bruyne or I go Walker. Right now, we have sort of pinch points within my team. I've got triple Liverpool. I also have, I'm one off triple City. So whatever transfer I make, if it's Salah, it could be De Bruyne, it could be Jota, but that would still lock me up on triple City or triple Liverpool either way. In terms of, let's say, the defense, though, I have options of Walker, for example, but no interest, for example, right now in going for another Liverpool defender. So that's the situation. I also need to monitor what's going on with Areola, but I really don't think that I'm going to be wasting a transfer on a goalkeeper, let's be honest. It's not like there's a double game week goalkeeper this week. We can wait until that time comes. I also think Areola's injury is not that serious. It's a good home fixture as well. I'm not expecting much from Dubravka away from home versus Aston Villa. Newcastle's defense, as we've said recently, haven't been that inspiring for me to sort of jump that hoop there, because Aston Villa are very, very competent attack still, even though they actually were not able to score versus Everton. So that's the position. In terms of captaincy as well, I think I'm still torn between Foden and Alvarez. Once again, it sort of depends on what the development is with, let's say, Haaland and that sort of news. If I think, for example, Haaland will make a cameo versus Burnley, I think it's very likely that I keep the captaincy on Foden. But I also would not be, interested in a Haaland captaincy whatsoever. Part of what I'll be looking into, of course, is just thinking about, once again, what the plan is with Salah, how bad that injury is for him, and whether, of course, I have an option to go in Jota. But I don't think that changes my captaincy at all. The rest of my team I'm pretty happy with. Darwin, at one point in time in my team, was someone that I was actually, super happy with selling. But I think the performances recently have been good. We expect this much from Darwin, to be honest. He's a very good player, and he gets into a lot of good positions, and it does make sense, of course, that here and there he's going to cash in, and he did so this week. Not so happy, of course, about him taking 2 points away from himself with the sort of last interaction in the game there when he was sort of defending a 4-0 lead, but, we take that. In terms of, let's say, just moving forwards, I think I'm in a luxury position because when I look at my transfers, for example, I've got a little bit more money in the bank than most people, so I have flexibility to go wherever I want. I still have Salah, and we're still in the landscape where we don't exactly know what the situation is with Haaland. I'm not going to jump that gun in terms of going to Haaland immediately. I think the next best opportunity to really move into Haaland is Gameweek 25. So I'm totally fine as a manager to sort of wait until that happens, right? Wait until he maybe has been able to build up some fitness. Wait until he's actually been able to consistently play 90 minutes or even at least 80 minutes per game before I actually think about moving towards Haaland and actually looking at him as a captaincy or vice captaincy option Gameweek 25. And also we have to sort of see, what's going on with the Salah situation. Let's say if Egypt get knocked out from any time between Gameweek 22 to 25, is it the case that Liverpool will try to rush him back to let's say playing competitive games, particularly when the fixtures in Gameweek 25 aren't particularly difficult? That's another question I sort of need to ask myself as a manager and get more information from. As I said, though, we might not get that information, but a lot of cup games will still happen. And ultimately, I'm just happy to be in the position that I am. Very, very lucky and fortunate so far. This game week was, more than I expected. 80 points is brilliant. Top 10K is brilliant. Let's hope we stay there. And that's it for my video this week. Hope you guys are wonderful. The cheat sheet will be coming out. A preview might be coming out as well. It just really depends on whether I have time to make the preview. Because part of the reason why I want to make this video here is to sort of just state my thoughts in terms of how I'm looking into the future without the additional information that we might get over the next few days. But once that information comes, I'll be able to make much more detailed videos, sort of making it much more focused towards transfers for Gameweek 22 for you guys and all you managers out there. But just wanted to sort of give my thoughts in terms of the landscape right now and how to sort of plan ahead as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.